Hi, I'm Jody.
And I'm Mariah.
And this is Beargrass Thunder.
And we're talking to Miss Shameka Parrish-Wright, running for Louisville Mayor.
My name is Shameka Parrish-Wright. I am running to be your next Louisville Mayor in 2022. I was the first to announce because I knew I had the biggest journey. We have not seen progressive leadership that I would bring, and I know I need to get out there to change hearts and minds and also be a part of solutions and using our progressive campaign to shift what we see in Louisville happening. Too many people have been ignored, and it's time for change. I represent that change. Thank you.
Ms. Shameka, thank you so much for sitting down with us for this interview. We are so excited for your campaign, and I am so excited because one of my first questions here is, what do you think about yardens in Louisville?
Or do you have a yarden?
I don't know if we can call it a yarden, but we have plants, bushes and plants that we planted. They're not producing any fruit or vegetables, but they're beautiful and they're producing flowers, and we support that. We definitely support our trees. So what have we been trying to do is talk to the neighbors about sustaining the trees that are in great condition and supporting the ones that aren't. So I definitely support yardens. I promise you I would have one if I wasn't so busy.
I completely understand that.
In your platform, you talk a bit about heat islands. Mm-hmm. What do you think that we can do in the first 4 years of your term to reduce the heat island effect in Louisville, the high temperatures in the Louisville area?
We definitely have to assess all of the parking, because a lot of them are parking lots, right? Mm-hmm. Assess them, make sure that they have trees, and that make sure that they're being used. I think a lot of our parking facilities aren't being used unless there's a big event in town. So to make people feel like transportation is desirable also has an impact on the heat islands. Less people will desire to park in those places if they have other options for transportation. So we already encourage carpool, improving bike lanes, making sure that people have what they need to use alternate forms of transportation, encouraging walkable communities, walkable neighborhoods, making sure that when they are walkable, there's a place to get shade, shelter, also making sure that if that a heat island is just sitting there and it's unused 90% of the time, then we need to promote a business being there. We need to promote more trees being planted, and we need to make sure that whoever owns it is a part of this solution and is taking an active role into reducing that.
So you know that I always love Yardens, transit, and two-way streets. That's yes. That's my main motto. But when we talk about infrastructure, a lot of what we see in Louisville is very car-based mm-hmm. and almost car-only in a lot of ways. And the state has a lot of infrastructure money that seems to be only funding car projects. And one of the biggest ones or I would say the most controversial projects being proposed, is to expand I-64 under Cherokee Park and potentially widening that tunnel or demolishing that hill. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on when the state is coming to Louisville to try to help the infrastructure and budget money, what do you want to do to kind of change this direction of where that money's actually going into the community? That's
a great question, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running. I've been seeing the constant power grab for our city, and I've been saying that Louisville needs a protector, and I get to be that, right? As you know, that's what the mayor is about. Like, what's happening? What happens when we have an outside entity or people who don't live here, thrive here, survive here, coming in to make decisions on what we should have, or people who just want to take care of their part of town? And we've had too much of that for more than 30 years. We've had that, and then we've had a big focus on bridges and, like you said, car projects. It could be that we have Ford here, but there's a way that we can have one of the major car manufacturers here, but still support a city that has multiple ways for folks to transport across the city to connect the communities. I think we lack that. I think that anything that is going to be done for our city needs to be about connecting the 80 small cities, and I don't see how redoing that corridor, redoing that part of that is going to help that. I like when I look at pictures and I see in other countries they have those bridges and then they become nature crossways for animals, and I think that we should be promoting things like that, or other options for people to walk or pedestrians and bikers. Our city's so spread out and laid out that there's enough room to create what we need. I don't think we need to undo something that's already established. I was told by an old alderman that there were plans to have light rail We need to be focused on things like that that's going to move a mass amount of people, and not some that's just making it better for some people who feel inconvenienced from having to use these other ways. I think that the focus on that has taken too much money. We have bridges that won't be paid for until 2054. We don't need to create those kind of projects again. We have enough of that. We have enough land. If we redirect those resources, we can make transportation better across our city. The problem is our city is not built for, even though it has a lot of car projects, it can't handle all the cars. Traffic continues to get worse, and if they think that they're going to keep building around that, and instead of dealing with what our infrastructure has and is able to be productive for and benefit more communities, it's not going to work. That's why I'm running, because I don't have those steering wheel in my back that says I'm beholden to these other corporations and companies. I have a people's agenda that wants to make life better for Louisvillians.
So we've been talking a lot about walking and everything. One of our questions we have here is, would you support opening the K&I Bridge from Portland to New Albany for bikes and pedestrians? Because right now it's railroad only.
You all make me feel so comfortable, because when I was reading it, I was like, I'm messing up. But it's just life, right? This is real. That's why you need a real progressive grassroots candidate. I'm not trying to look perfect. I'm trying to make our city better together in partnership. And part of that partnership is that not all of us choose to drive. Mm-hmm. I hate driving. I want to park my truck and only use it when I need to. The problem is there's no way I can do all the things I do without having a car. Mm-hmm. And so we got to create more opportunities. Yes, I would definitely be supportive of opening that back up. I was thinking about it when you mentioned it, and that seems like that's the more narrow part of the river, so that makes sense. And people would love that opportunity to be able to cross and walk back and forth. I think it benefits both cities. I think all the communities that are connected to those, all the businesses that are connected, it would benefit them in a great way, and we should make sure. That's what I'm saying. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have some things that were in place that worked. There's a way to have sustainable growth and development, but you have to make the lives of the people who will be mostly impacted comfortable, or it's pointless. We can't do any of that without improving ways to transit, ways to walk, and ways to bike around our city.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that's just going to lead me to my follow-up question. I'm from Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh happens to be demographically the second oldest county in America. The reason that is because people stay in Pittsburgh. They live in Pittsburgh for years and years and years. Now, my family came to Pittsburgh, and here I am down in Louisville, so it wasn't the case for me. But when I moved down here, I noticed for a lot of people, they come to Louisville, they spend their adult lives, and there is a big culture of going down to Destin, down Florida, after they're kind of done and they're ready to retire. So my question is, do you intend to stay in Louisville for the rest of your life? And if you do, what are you going to do when you age out of driving?
I love you all's questions. These are the best questions because they really make you think, and no team can prep you for these. Keep it going. So I will say, when I talk about being every Louisvillian, I mean that. I'm a Louisvillian that left and came back. I chose to raise my family here. I have 4 JCPS graduates. I have 2 that are still in school, and now I have 3 grandkids. And if I'm telling you I'm mom to mayor, that means I'm not going anywhere, right? I'm locked into this city no matter what. And even if I don't become mayor, I'm still committed to making sure our city gets better. All of my previous positions did that. I'm going to shake things up. I did say that when I was on my way back from Miami when I lived there with my husband, because he's from Miami. And you know that every other person you meet is actually not from Louisville. Mm-hmm. It is a place where people come to grow and survive and thrive. Same with me. I moved here from Cincinnati. And so where people might see that as a drawback because I wasn't born here. I raised a family here. I got married here. I went to college here, graduated from college here. So I've done the things that you want to do when you're told, go to school, do the right thing, and go somewhere and get a job. I'm about social justice. And I think that that's what people get hung up on. But that social justice improves the lives of everyone, whether they agree or not, whether they participate or not. The things that we're fighting for, the livable wages, the clean air, the Medicaid for all, the legalization of marijuana, the criminalization has to come with that. All of those things that we're fighting for means that it makes the city better. I want to be here. I never believe in living in a neighborhood where I don't know my neighbors, where I don't talk to them, where we don't ask about things. Even when I have these grand adventures and projects, I go talk to my neighbors first. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you need? because I know that my reality is different because I'm choosing to dive into it, and they're just like, look, I want to live, pay my mortgage, and take care of my business. I'm not into all of that. And so for me, yes, I'm so committed to Louisville. When I moved here, I did have a 2-year plan and got wrapped up, started working on with organizations and projects, and I really feel like we're at the best position across the state for progressive change that not only will make our city better, but will make the state better. So I'm hoping with this campaign to have a ripple effect across our city, across our county, and every 120 county. And that's a full commitment to this city. And then I recently found out that my family has a strong roots in West Louisville as well as Winchester, Kentucky. So there's people who I hadn't met in my life who came here and started their family and just kept going. And so I plan to be one of those people. Definitely committed. I do like to travel. I always say if you live here, you got to travel and come back, you know. But other than that, yes, I'm here however long I'll live. I didn't have another way to say that. Here till I die.
And the second half of that was just, what do you tend to do when you age out of driving?
That's why I'm working hard now, right? I'm 44. I want to be done working by the time, before I'm 60. I want to not have to drive in the next 10 to 12 years. So that means that becoming mayor means I get to put some things in place to make sure that's so. I have a dear mentor that we just lost recently in 2018 named Tom Moffitt, who I watch intentionally to make the decision not to drive, make the decision to go to assisted living, and take his little foldable chair with him and be at every event, every function, every social justice meeting. And I saw him model that in a great way. He said, Shameka, I can get around town. I can make it. I don't have to drive. I want people to make those kind of decisions, but we have to give them options to do so. My mother never drove. She caught the bus with us. We walked everywhere. And I come from that. I started driving and then I said, oh, wow, I want to go back to it. So that's why another reason why I'm running. That's one of the reasons why I respect our mayor of Shively, Beverly Chester Burton, who fought for the 4 years she's been mayor. Well, coming up on 4 years, she was on council first. She fought to get sidewalks put in Shively on those major streets. It took her years to do that. I want to start now. This is why I'm putting these ideas out there. That's why when I get in office, the first thing I'm looking at is that infrastructure and how we can improve it, because that makes a difference. And if we're talking about moving from civil unrest, we have to give people a project. I think a light rail is a project that everybody can buy in. Some people have even brought up rail cars. Making that a pedestrian bridge again in Portland means a great deal. And that would help Portland a great deal. I think the benefits that we see at Waterfront Park and all the other places, and the concentration we see on downtown needs to spread throughout the city. And that's what too many people tell me when I talk to them. Nobody cares about what happens to us. So I want to work on something that connects all of our cities. And the way that we do that is better transportation. And the way that I can lead by that is by catching a bus. Not just when my car is down, but making a conscious decision to catch the bus as much as possible, walk as much as possible, and we bike ride in my family.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to toss it back over to Jody for a question now.
So, one of the biggest things that I've seen happen in the last 10 years in Louisville is that a lot of times the developers come into a neighborhood with a great marketing pitch. They have a great plan that's photoshopped in the background. And then when it happens, all the house prices either triple or quadruple. The rent goes up astronomically. And the changes that were brought to the neighborhood as a proposed good thing don't actually affect any of the original residents. And so the word revitalization for me, it's always a kind of a double-edged sword living here. And I wanted to hear what your vision might be for how do we make these neighborhoods better, but at the same time for the actual residents that live there now.
You're exactly right. You cannot have successful, sustainable redevelopment if you don't have the communities engaged in the decision-making process. One of the things I want to do is set up where there's a community agreement, where when an entity or a developer or whoever decides they want to put a methane biodigester in a city, in a community, that the community gets to say if they want it, that there needs to be a real live contract of them saying, we commit to hiring people from the community, we commit to livable wages, we want to give you our environmental impact, a real impact analysis of what that means. Does that mean that they're going to build a big parking lot, or are they going to create a heat island? Are they going to take away and do eminent domain or buy out people's houses, or they're going to force people to move? Because when I heard when the airport was moving, I read this recently, a lot of people were uprooted. And so sometimes when there's a government or a statewide decision or plan, those communities don't even have a say, and it just happens to them. We're done with things just happening to our communities. We have to have an active role. We have to have community liaison, community boards. There's a lot of great boards and community groups that are working to take back their communities, to have ownership and control. That's exactly how it should be. You know, there's talks about people wanting to reincorporate the West End because they feel like with merger, they lost the power. They don't have their own police department. They don't have a lot of say. And so what does that mean? I want to hear what their thoughts are about it. I just got to notice that someone wants to open up an on-ramp that lets off to Broadway. Now, for me, immediately that sends red flags because Broadway is already a two-way street, and then we have a off-ramp that's around the corner. But his reasoning was that the businesses are neglected there. And so if there was an off-ramp, they would get more business. Now, we know when we're thinking about the infrastructure, it may not play out the way he's thinking, and it needs to be more businesses and all those other things to happen because traffic can back up and things like that. The thing is that people in these communities are already thinking about better ways to improve it. They're just not being heard. So I think my biggest job is bringing those people to the table and making sure that they understand what's happening. The city already has a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, and we just don't know it, right? And we don't know it until they're ready to roll something out to us. Being at Injustice Square during the Justice for Breonna Taylor movement, someone sent me the plans they had a whole redevelopment of that park. And then when you see it, they created it was less trees, some heat islands, and then they had one little section that said protest, and it was a white guy with a bullhorn. I was like, oh, so they approve of this. Why are they fighting us so hard on this? They approve of us gathering here. Obviously, it's in the new plans. The problem is that they have these ideas, and you have all the folks who come from the Ivy League schools or developers in other cities, and they say, oh, I can come and make this happen, but you cannot if you're not talking to the people who's going to have to live it, work it, survive it, and you cannot do that. So for me, it's about making sure that any decisions that are made, the community has a say on, and we work it out. If that means, people are like, well, that means you'll be all night and rolling up your sleeves. I said I do that anyway. I've been at zoning meetings for till 3 a.m. I'm already committed. I already have the temperament to see it through and to stay at that table until we get something that people can take home and sleep well with at night. I can't have it no other way. It wouldn't be honoring my community. It wouldn't be honoring any of the work that I've done before if I didn't do so. So yes, I think folks want something new, but they want to be a part of what that is. They want to have a stake in it, and we cannot do that if we just ignore them or make it look pretty and say, oh, make your comments online by 2 days from now, but they're not thinking about our comments. They don't care what we're saying. This whole budget thing with the whole ARP funding. And then we'll see. So we got to have elected leaders that are willing to take the people's voice further, but also make sure that the people's voice is at that decision-making table. So I will definitely do that.
Every answer you give, I just can't stop nodding my head because I really resonate with what you're saying. I wanted to ask, we're speaking of certain 2040 plans, 2020 plans, or 2030 plans now. And one of the plans that has actually just been recently approved by KIPDA is a Beargrass Creek trail connecting Newburgh under I-264 all the way to the river. Currently, the date for completion is 2035, and that's hinging on funding.
Right.
And so I'm asking, do you think that there would be a way that we could look at prioritizing certain greenways connecting to neighborhoods that currently don't even have sidewalks going over the interstates?
definitely, as somebody who lives in a neighborhood without those sidewalks, and as I lived out in Bent Creek in the Newburgh area and saw what happens, especially when those creeks flood, and then just not giving the attention they need, and being there and not being able to come out our doors. I definitely think we should prioritize greenways. I think it goes back to that question you had about what's happening with Cherokee Park. Yeah. To me, this other project seems more of a priority than that. And there's more reasoning around it when you're connecting communities. I think that anybody that wants to be mayor has to be focused on connecting these 80 cities and all these communities that are in Jefferson County. So yes, I think there's a way that we should be able to shift that. That's what I'm saying. Did the people get to decide which one is a priority, and are we presenting it to them in a way that they can make those decisions? So the resident councils, all of these groups that are doing amazing work, they're telling us to fight, to stop gun violence, but this is an infrastructure issue that will impact our lives. That's just as important as that. So why are we not having those conversations? So I definitely think we need to make sure that is a priority and that folks are talking about it. I always say that every region is in threat of a natural disaster, and so if we don't get in front of these things, we sit on fault lines, things like that. And with global warming, with climate change, if we don't start working on these greenways and these pathways, we're going to be, I remember when it flooded here. I mean, it can be really bad, and so we need to start working on it now. I mean, we pay a lot for MSD.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pivot and ask a big question and just kind of give you the space to answer it. So you even mentioned in your answer to your last question, the gun violence, which of course is just a big, I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up what is probably one of the biggest concerns on a lot of Louisvillians' minds, and especially after the Breonna Taylor uprising and everything that has been going on in the city the last year. Do you intend on decreasing the funding for LNPD's budget? And just what is your idea of safety in the city?
That's the thing, is that we all talk about safety, and we definitely have to have people who are impacted as a part of those decisions. When I talk to people, I'm a gun violence survivor. I will tell you, I wouldn't have survived my childhood without programming, without access to resources, I was a teen mom at 15. Everything in my story tells you that I shouldn't be right here now doing an interview for you about my campaign for mayor. Everything was stacked against me. I tell you that through faith, of course, but mostly through the programming and the access to it is how I survive. And that's how we will survive. And that's how any young person will survive, is knowing that they have a way out, that they have options, and that they're educated. They have to be educated. I've been saying to people, we can't treat guns like we did abstinence and say just ignore it and it'll go away. It's just going to multiply and multiply, because too many of and it's not just young people doing it, but a great deal of young people are impacted by it, are using guns as a form of power, as a form of when you're poor and you got a gun, you don't feel as poor, right? You feel like you can make power moves because you have that gun. But I will tell you, most of the people who are using guns are doing it in a form of protection. And then because they're not educated, they're not trained in gun safety, they're not responsible gun owners, these mistakes happen, these stray bullets happen, all of these things happen. I worry about that with my sons, with my nieces, nephews, with people I don't talk to every day, that any of them can be a victim of that. So I think that we're not going to police our way out of this. We have the police. The police do have a part in some of this, and we want them to be able to investigate. So yes, when I talk about defund and reallocation, I'm talking about letting the police focus on what we hired them to do, to protect us, to investigate murders and crimes that they see. And have our programming and our community and our trained professionals focus on ending that violence, dealing with the direct services that are needed, and being able to give them that. If we keep inflating the police budget, but violence has not went down, crime has not went down, that is not the answer. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do that. And it doesn't take another study to tell us. Studies show that kids that get engaged early, that get training and understanding about the impacts of gun violence, about guns and all of those things, they fare better with understanding when they're making that decision. There needs to be more thoughts around conflict resolution, more people who come from the community who are helping to provide that trauma response, who people trust, to tell it to. A lot of people do divert crime that you don't hear about. I've done it. I've stopped somebody from going to shoot somebody. That is happening all the time. It just doesn't get elevated, and they don't get $100,000 paid position to do it. They're just doing it because they're called to do it. I think that this is where our faith community comes in as well. We have a lot of gun violence in communities, and we also have a lot of churches there. Churches should be seen as safe, neutral zones where people can go, and if they're scared, as a safe place, also to talk to someone, also to get the support and everything that they need. I think that the police have to make up their mind. You want to police us, you want us to leave you alone and keep giving you money, but you don't have all the tools needed to solve these issues. It's obvious. So you need to focus on what we hire you to do, with adequate training and how you respond in our community, with people who come from our community also working with you. And then we need to have that some of that funding go. They don't want to let go of the funding. They're saying we're not therapists, we're not lawyers, we're not all these people, but then they don't want to let go of the funding. You have to let go of the funding. You can hold and I know that they try to hold community meetings and living rooms, but they have to bring, this work has to be by all of us. We all have to have a partnership into ending the violence and reducing the crime. We're not all given the opportunity to do so. And then when you do sign up as an ambassador, or somebody who wants to be a person who de-escalates, you don't get paid. That's not a paid position. You just choosing to do it. But then somebody else is paid $100,000 off of your work. And so that's why a lot of community people are like, what's the point? How can I get involved? How can I do this full time if I'm not supported? So that funding should go to people who are ready to go out there, because they're already doing it anyway. We just don't hear about it and see it, right? And I think that no mayor can reduce any violence without partnership, without working with the communities and the people that are dealing with it. So I'm not trying to be a mayor that just shows up at your party events. I want to show up in your community and talk to you and ask you, what are some ideas you have? Who are some kids you see that are in danger of gun violence? Who are some seniors who don't understand that the kids are playing in their yard, they don't need to pull a gun on them? And why, when the police do take guns off the street, they're not taking them while they're in use. They're taking them from people who carry them for protection and who don't understand Kentucky's laws and who think that they can carry it because we're an open carry state. So there's a lot of miscommunication. And so they like to, applaud themselves for removing the guns. The problem is they also take the confiscated guns and repurpose them, sell them back to the state, and the state gives them right back to the pawn shops and the gun dealer. So they have to own their role in some of this. Like, with the young people aren't getting these guns by themselves. They're coming back in the communities, the access to those. We have to deal with all aspects of it. People just want to talk about black people stopping the violence on black people, but it's happening all over our city. And we all have to make sure that we're being responsible and that we're bringing in the young people and working with them. We cannot do that if we don't have a place for them to go, if they don't feel safe, if they're looked at as a weapon every time they do show up somewhere. I think that that's what made our work at Injustice Square for the Justice for Breonna Taylor movement so important, because these young people who were seen as weapons, who were seen as threats, decided they were going to come and put their bodies on the line to stand up for this injustice against Breonna Taylor and too many more. And they were tired, but they didn't have a lot of people who were willing to take them in and really ready to deal with them and let them be a part of the solution. Ask the young people what we should do about gun violence. Ask them what they think. When I did gun violence work, I had a contract with Swords of Justice Network, and I did some contract work where I worked on ending gun violence. I found out that even some of my closest friends had 3 to 5 guns, had guns on layaway. I did an anonymous survey, and all of these folks started telling me all the guns that they have. So then we went to the Urban League, and the Urban League has some youth camps, and we asked the youth how many guns they think do they think are in their community. They said words like 100,000, 400,000, 500,000. And so the thing is, guns still hold value even if they're old. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these guns are just there. They're around the house. And I talked about before with Luther Brown and the education. We need to do gun buybacks with no discrimination. We need to do amnesty where folks can answer to their bench warrants and things like that, because those are the kind of things that people get caught up in when it's around using a gun. So I think there's many layers to it. Everybody wants it to be safe. We need to work together to create more safe zones. You cannot do that without education. You cannot do that without resources and giving them more opportunities to be a part of the solution. So I plan to try to get in there and to do that in partnership. It cannot just be, it's not just one person. We can set up a committee to tell us about what the other committee is doing. I'm really talking about doing the real work.
Thank you for really digging into such a big question there. I really appreciate your answer.
Two questions before we have to finish. One of the biggest things that has happened in the past 2 weeks is that the eviction moratorium has now ended. And so nationwide, there's going to be millions of people out on the street. Louisville, we're looking at least thousands. And many of them are going to be first-time homeless or first-time houseless and just now getting into that situation. How are you going to take steps to decriminalize what currently is seen as a scourge on the city and is being basically weaponizing the police force to remove houseless individuals from certain city property?
Yeah, interpreting it as camping and such.
I, as somebody who is not only, and thank you for mentioning first-time homelessness, because that's a whole different ball game than someone like myself who's been chronically homeless before. You have knowledge on how to get things done, what services to go to, how to get emergency shelter. But when you're first time, it's embarrassing. You might not want to tell. You might struggle for a while before you even get the word out. So you might be in your car sleeping. You might be trying to get into a shelter, get on a waiting list. It definitely, I don't think that any police officer should be harassing anyone that's houseless, period. Anyone that's houseless, if they're not posing a direct danger to somebody or public or maybe if they're not tearing up a building, then they should not be bothered. So if people have to do what they need to do, there'll always be a homeless community, and we have to accept that. Louisville itself does not have enough affordable housing. And this is where we push back on those developers who are so focused on running our city and keeping Whiskey Row looking good. They need to be focused on making sure there's affordable housing in every zip code. And that's something that I would push on them to do. You all have a lot of apartments, just like a lot of cars. They have whole heat islands where cars are just sitting there parked because there's been so many produced and people can't afford the new cars. I think it's the same for these developers. As you're building these new buildings, you should have units that are dedicated to affordable housing in every community, and no community should be fighting that because it can be them the next day. If it's true that most Americans are 2 to 3 paychecks from being houseless or on the streets, then that tells you that we are in a great deal of danger. And so we got to start now. We have to make sure that there's more rehab in a lot of these buildings. JCPS owns a great deal of the buildings, as well as our city owns let people rehab them, get them the time they do. The land bank isn't always working because they want you to have the money in there before you can do it, like a certain amount of money before you can do it. I think we have some programs that are working, but they're not working fast enough. I know what it's like to have a voucher and looking for a landlord. I think Councilwoman Green and some other folks did a good job at removing some of the barriers around previous evictions, around previous convictions, around employment sources. Those 3 things are what hinders people from going from one apartment to the next. I think that landlords have to trust in the people. I don't want to see them all fail in business. I want to see them, and it's a way that we can do it together. There's a lot of vouchers out there that Louisville Metro Housing Authority has, but the landlords aren't taking them, and it's hard to, and they say they're not taking them because of the cost of the rent that they set and then the regulation. Well, we don't want you to be a slumlord. Like if I'm getting evicted and I choose your place and it's not up to code, then I'm going from the frying pan to the skillet, and that doesn't reduce the problem. So houselessness is very near and dear to my heart. I'm on the Homeless Coalition Continuum Care Board as a person that's directly impacted by houselessness, and making sure that our decisions as we work with developers and housing corporations to make sure that they're considering the impact and how that's going to continue to grow. More people are going to be living together. Landlords should be okay with that. Don't charge them double to triple rent because you think 2 to 3 more people are living. The way it's going, a lot of us are going to be having to live like unified in a compound type lifestyle to be able to afford things because our wages our wages don't match the real estate, so we don't make enough to pay enough rent. Like our 2-bedroom apartments are ridiculous, and I'm watching my daughters going through it and asking them, you know, do they want to consider living together? So it is, and then I saw over where Americana Way is, there's a bunch of units that aren't rehabbed and aren't used that folks can start getting into and get those people in there. And so old hotels that are just sitting there not used. I think the city, I was one of the people who suggested that the city buy. I was trying to, because they were talking about closing in Justice Square, and I was like, you know what? We have to create a space where people go, where they can get clean, they can get the hygiene they need, the medicines, and I suggested that they buy the old Archdiocese headquarters, and then to see that, and the other address that they just bought. So that tells me that there's some thinking, and folks are trying to remedy the problem, but I do think it's going to get worse, and especially for first-time houseless folks. But if we get out in front of this and we let them know what the resources are, we can do a better job in supporting the programs that do this too. Feed Louisville, Feed the West, Hope Us, all these other folks who are, and Hip Hop Cares are doing direct aid to those. They can be our main instruments in letting people know where those housing options are. They are already doing it. Let's fund that and make sure more happens.
Thank you.
Our last question. Morale,
do I want to do it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. So our last question, thank you so much for all your time today, and we just really appreciate everything. Our last official question that we have for you is, what is your number one campaign priority / what's the first thing you're going to do once you get into office?
Take a deep breath and get to assessing what departments are there. I think that people talk about we don't have the money. I think we got a lot more money than we realize. And the only way to know that is to get in and assess the departments that are in there, the administration, the many jobs, the folks who are, the jobs that can be combined, the improving the livable wages for the Metro Louisville employees. There's over 6,000 employees who have been passed up, neglected, a lot of people who have been grandfathered in. There's a lot of nepotism. So we have to get in there and deal with the internal workings of the administration and how those things are set up and reprioritize that and keep the needs of the community first, and those who are providing the first direct services for resources get addressed first. So making sure that we have people in place who are ready to bring more options to the community, and making sure that we make sure that people are appointed who are ready to get to work. Everybody there will have to submit why they should keep their job. I don't want to go through and fire everybody, but I'm willing to make sure we have good people there who are committed to moving our city forward, and then sit down with the police chief and the police and make some immediate changes there. That is the first things that I want to work on as soon as I become mayor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shameka. On behalf of Beargrass Thunder, we cannot thank you enough for leading the charge in this campaign. We really appreciate your time in this interview. And is there anything else you'd like to say to plug your campaign or plug your next event? Or anything
you would like to say directly to our fans or anything like that?
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the things that Louisvillians have been asking me for that I want to work on as mayor. Push for Louisville to be a nationally known city for the arts. Push for the city to join Major League Soccer teams. Grants for local businesses to become venues, speakers, and copyright licenses needed. Foodie tours, return to of trolleys and modern streetcars. Olmsted Park hiking and historical tours. Improve public transit, which we talked about a lot. And our airport was already set up for light rail, so let's get that busy. And our airport in downtown. Legalization of cannabis and medical marijuana and dispensaries, and with decriminalization, so that more people have opportunities to earn monies from that. New national ad campaign with tourism ideas that take people not only downtown, not only the Bourbon Trail, but through all our amazing communities. Louisville is beautiful, and more people need to see that and stay. We want people to come here and stay, and that is the way you get them to do that. Affordable home ownership in every zip code, universal early childhood education. All my kids survived it. I think everyone should have it, no matter what your income bracket is. And increased recycle pickup is something that has come up along the board. If you have more ideas, ShamekaParrish-Wright.com. Give us your ideas. Let's get moving.